Get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Naomi Valentine, and I work for Community Action Partnership as a housing navigator and homebuyer counselor. We're located in Kalispell, Montana, and I'm your room host for this breakout. LaDawn, Temple, and Chandler will be our presenters, and they'll be going. We've got a few housekeeping items. Welcome. Oh, let's get everybody in. Good. Everyone's jumping on now. Okay. Just want to make sure I get everybody in. There we go. Okay, so if you haven't already, would you please put your mics down in the left-hand corner and go ahead and hit stop video as well. Just while our presenters are presenting, we would like no distractions. In my last session, I had a guy who was apparently driving and he was sort of yelling at the driver traffic and he forgot something, which was funny, but a little distracting. So go ahead and use the chat function for any questions and we will be answering those as we go along. All are being recorded. Please, select the chat icon when you're ready and then you can turn your video back on. Into the session, we will have 30 minutes or so to answer questions. If you want to turn your videos on back then, that would be fine. If you find any, so everyone has a little whiteboard paddle. You got your little whiteboard in the mail, and they ask that if you find something inspiring, exciting, or new, just write a quick adjective on your whiteboard and let us know the Q&A session. I'll go ahead and turn it over to LaDawn and go ahead and start muting folks who haven't already done that. All right.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Naomi, do we need to turn on record or is it automatically recording?
It is automatically recording.
All right, wonderful. Great, so welcome everyone. I hope you got a little lunch and we will try not to help you go to sleep since it's easy to go to sleep after lunch. My name is LaDawn Whiteside and I am the current president of Montana Mediation Association. And several of you on this particular presentation know me from my previous life doing other things in the state of Montana. I have been working in Montana for about 34 years. And so I've done a lot of things so people know me in different capacities. So today I'm speaking as the president of the Montana Mediation Association. And I just thought it would be kind of fun for you to know how the three of us presenters got to know each other and how come this presentation or how this presentation came to be, because the relationships that we established here are not magic. Anyone can do it in their community. And I think that's a really important thing. All of the people in housing work together to help people obtain, sustain, maintain all of those words regarding housing, especially people of modest means who need additional support. So you're used to working in a community, but what we have done, the three of us here have done, is overlapping from some comfort zones to some, I guess, more unique relationships. And so that's what we want to talk about today. So the way that I became familiar with Temple is that we are both mediators, and we're both certified mediators, and we both sit on the board of the Montana Mediation Association. And we have known each other, I didn't really keep it counted up, but I'm thinking we've known each other in excess of 5 years now. And I help Temple at the Billings Mediation Center with her landlord-tenant specific cases with the Billings Mediation Center. And she does many other topics within the court system there in Billings, but the ones that I particularly help are with Tuesday mornings, which are dedicated to landlord-tenant issues in the Yellowstone County area. I was driving down the road. I'm not sure which happened first. I heard on the radio, maybe last fall, about a housing navigator program in Helena. And I was not familiar with, I was familiar with Good Sam. I'm pretty familiar with all of the housing first, no door, let's see, no wrong door program. I'm pretty much familiar with those programs from various things that I've done over the years. But what I was not familiar with was housing navigation. And I was not familiar with Chandler through the Good Samaritan organization. So when I heard that on the radio and about the same time read a newspaper article, I thought I have to call her. COVID was going strong by then. No, it wasn't. We started working together before COVID started. Yeah. And so Chandler and I started talking by telephone and started putting together some ways that I and the Helena Montana Mediation Association people could help with housing in the Lewis and Clark County area. And so through the relationship that I had with Chandler now, with Temple already existing, we decided that the thing that we wanted to do was to write an article for the local newspaper, telling people about this partnership and the ability to use mediation for landlord-tenant issues. And also, we decided at that point to write a letter, kind of educational letter, to the property managers and Montana Landlord Association, because we were working with, all three of us were working with those organizations in various parts of the state, but we really didn't have material to just give this associations and organizations and say, this is what we have to offer. So we proceeded with writing that letter and getting that into the association newsletters. And from that, we decided to write a proposal, a speaker proposal for this organization and conference. So that's how we came to be here today. It was kind of mutual interest in doing something unusual and different and trying to educate the public and the community as a whole. So as we go through here, each speaker will kind of tell a little bit more about themselves. So just wanted to let you know that Chandler's from the Good Samaritan Ministries. She lives and works in Helena, and she is the housing navigator. Temple McLean is the executive director and certified mediator for the Billings Mediation Center, which is in Yellowstone County. And we will move on to the next slide. So the learning objectives for this particular presentation are: participants will understand how mediation is being used to resolve landlord-tenant disputes in Montana communities. Participants will master ways to locate a qualified mediator. And participants will explore what landlord-tenant conflicts are best suited to mediation. So a lot of people, including myself, before I really became involved in the mediator community, I know that in one of my previous jobs that Jennifer Fox and Rachel Turnbow know that I did a lot of work with healthcare and resolving disputes. And so I fancied myself as someone who had skills in negotiation, mediation, and regulation. And so I believe that I was using mediation skills, which I was, but not formal. I was using the existing skills that I had developed over the past 30 years, 20 years, whatever it was, about how to communicate with people about problems, to come up with solutions, and to help people resolve things. So those were existing skills that I personally had. What ended up happening was I decided, there's kind of a story behind it, but at some point in time, I decided I wanted to create new skills. And those new skills were capitalizing on skills that I already had, one of which I called mediation. So I decided to take a mediation class. And that class led me to the Montana Mediation Association. That was like 10 years ago. And now being president of the Mediation Association. So I guess everybody comes to this world adulthood at least, with a set of communication skills. And so those are what I'm calling existing skills. There are, classes in communication, there's classes in dispute resolution, there's classes on working with difficult people, there's all kinds of classes. But one of the classes that we'll focus on today is the mediation classes. So that is considered a fundamental skills training class that requires a whole bunch of role playing and practicing. To become a certified mediator in Montana, you have to have a certain class, you have to have a certain number of hours of observation, you have to have a certain number of hours co-mediating, and you have to have a certain number of hours solo mediating, and then you have to have a certain number of hours per year continuing education. So there's quite a significant amount of training required to call yourself a certified mediator. In Montana, there is not a state law or a regulatory authority that says I'm licensed as a mediator. We don't have that in Montana. We only have the certification in Montana, which means that anybody can call themselves a mediator, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are a certified mediator, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the type of skills for resolving issues that a certified mediator has. So we want to focus on a very unique type of skills for mediating these landlord-tenant issues. So around Helena particularly, I know it's true across the country or across Montana, there have been a lot of building and remodeling projects going on, especially for affordable housing and new home building. And so this is an opportunity to get people into housing that have maybe been on a wait list for a long time, but there are a lot of barriers for people getting into housing. So through my work with domestic violence programs, mediation, and work with Chandler, I have learned more and more about the barriers for housing. So I have kind of expanded my understanding, which I'm trying to pass on to you in an hour here, along with my co-presenters about how things can work and what mediation can be used for and unique strategies. And also from the eviction prevention strategies where people are behind or in arrears, having troubles communicating between the landlord and the tenant. So that is kind of what we're going to focus on today. We're going to hear how communities in Billings, Bozeman, Helena, and Missoula are using certified mediators and existing systems to help landlords and tenants work out conflict. So Chandler, would you capitalize on the new building, remodeling, and eviction prevention strategies, please?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you again for joining our session. As LaDawn noted, my name is Chandler Rawling. I'm the housing navigator at Good Samaritan Ministries in Helena, Montana. So super excited to be here. Before I get going on talking about those mediation services and expansion of housing services as well, I want to just kind of give you a background in regards to me and some of my certifications. Next slide, please. So I'm originally from Northwest Indiana, and during high school and college, I experienced housing instability and homelessness. And so that experience had a huge impact on me and what I'm doing now. And by what I'm doing now, I'm giving back and healing in my own way with the work that I've been able to do in regards to housing. And so I came to Montana about 2.5 years ago. And I started at United Way of the Lewis and Clark area here in Helena, and I helped them run their Helena's coordinated entry system. And if some of you folks are not familiar with what that is, it's basically just a state or and federal mandated program to help coordinate services and to better house homeless folks. And so from that work, we've been able to recognize a lot of the different needs in our community. And one need that came up was the need for a housing navigator or housing navigation services. And so that's what has brought me here today. And next slide, please. And so basically our city of Helena and Lewis and Clark County got together to create an RFP to provide this service. And so Good Samaritan Ministries was the one that received it and became the host site for this service. And then I was hired in to serve as their housing navigator. And just a little bit of a background in regards to what the program does and to what we'll get to with mediation is that this program was meant to connect and engage with community members, landlords, property managers, housing partners, to connect them to services and resources, and just to increase the capacity for collaboration, to kind of get rid of the silo mentality. And so when the program started, it began in January of 2020. So kind of right when COVID was happening. And so it was a very interesting time to be able to start this pilot project. But it soon showed within just the first pilot year of 2020, that huge need that the community had for it. And so for 2020, the program was able to serve a total of 268 people. And out of the 268, 182 of those community members were successfully housed, which I am very proud to be able to say. But yeah, so even with that success, though, there was a lot that had to go into being able to have those numbers. And so one type of tool that has been used, and I will note that I'm not technically a certified mediator, but again, LaDawn had mentioned some of those basic skills and the empathy that I provide from my background. Mediation has been a huge benefactor and a tool that's utilized within our community and to help house people or keep them housed if they're experiencing housing instability. And so one thing I wanted to go over was the three main reasons why mediation has come up within the program. And I'm sure Temple and LaDawn may give other examples too. But one thing that comes up is between the landlord and tenant disputes. And so, for example, some cases that has been predominant, especially during COVID, was some folks that they may experience issues with non-payment of rent. And so one thing that has been really great to have is being able to meet with landlords, even though most of them are still doing house showings, or if they're doing virtual, we would still meet and talk with them. But creating and fostering that relationship with your local private landlords and property managers was huge when it came to issues with disputes like non-payment of rent. And so we were able to create that trust between those landlords and the program. And so with that trust, a lot of the solutions that came up was being able to let the landlord give that tenant an opportunity to maybe stay for another month. So do a month-to-month lease while they are continuing to work with my program to look for new housing options, if that's what the situation entailed it to be. Obviously, the first priority when it comes to trying to help house folks was trying to keep the person in their house. So if we can try to provide mediation, and practically it really is just open communication and knowing what's going on the tenant side and what's happening on the landlord side. And so with the program, when people come in, if they're not technically displaced from their home just yet, mediation is that first key priority to try to provide diversion to help keep someone housed. And so that's the first priority, because the market itself, obviously most of you know on the call, it's not the best. So trying to find a new housing solution for someone will be tough. It'll have challenges. And so trying to mediate and keep someone housed in their current place would be the first step. But if that doesn't happen, then that's when that additional other solutions come up. Another thing too with that, with the issue that might arise with back rent, typically when I've been meeting with folks, and also I've been working with the state for that emergency rental assistance, on average, folks are not necessarily like behind months. Like usually it's about maybe a month or two, which is pretty practical in sense of creating payment plans. And so those are the next kind of step and solutions that my program tries to help with the communication between a landlord and tenant is maybe coming up with a plan, a budget to do repayment plans, or utilizing the resources if they qualify for local financial assistance. So like the emergency rental assistance program, or at Good Samaritans, we also provide our additional assistance too for eviction prevention, and also for through what's called ESG, or the Emergency Solutions Grants, if we have to look for new housing options. And so that's just one factor that mediation provides. Another one too is with communication with new landlords. And so many of you had mentioned in other sessions that there is definitely new landlords coming in, folks coming in from out of state, buying some of these rental units and renting them out. And also there is some landlords that currently reside out of the state of Montana, but they're renting their units within the state of Montana. So they're not here. So it's hard to foster those relationships and being able to build and engage with landlords. But we've been still successful in doing that with this program, and being able to either connect with them one-on-one, or connecting them if they've hired a property manager to manage their units. And with that communication and having that relationship with landlords, I can't tell you enough how much that is a key factor in creating successful mediation. Having that already established relationship and trust with the landlords, and also the tenant knowing that you're working on both sides. So, it's not just one-sided with helping one half or the other. It's both. This is a collaborative effort. And then also with the future work that's happening when the eviction ban is being lifted. So mainly what my program is doing is we've reached out to the Justice Court and continue to push out the services that this program provides by creating events. We're doing a landlord engagement event too that I posted on the app, as well as with creating renter courses. So in 2 weeks, I'm going to be launching a renter course for the community, for both anyone to be able to attend, as well as our as well as our clients in the program. So I'm super excited to be able to offer that as a service for folks. It's been long coming, so I'm very excited to be able to offer it. And we're going, and one of the things that the renter course will go over, it covers a lot in the curriculum, but one thing that it does include is that with the eviction ban piece and what to do. So coming up with that communication and that education. And so I think having that also successful mediation comes up with being knowledgeable, knowing what you're going into, knowing what is going on, both on rights and other case-by-case basis. So knowing what a tenant's rights are and what a landlord's rights are, and how that process goes with the eviction, everything like that. So being able to educate folks. And so that's what the renter course is going to encompass, to hopefully make a better and successful transition to new housing, or keeping people housed where they're at. And then to kind of wrap up with the program too, a lot of this with the success of mediation just cannot be done alone. And so Good Samaritan Ministries offers multiple other parts that in a whole, with having it all as a support, is what makes it all successful for housing. And so Good Samaritan Ministries also offers our assistance ministry part that encompasses that financial piece. Our Place Drop-In Center, which is our drop-in center downtown, that also has our amazing peer supporters, and then also our street outreach coordinator that coordinates with folks that are homeless. And so I hope that was helpful, and thank you guys. So I'm gonna pass the baton over.
Chandler, can I say something just before Temple starts? I just wanted to say to you, Chandler, how appreciative we as the mediators are that you have been willing to let us work with you on curriculum development for that renters education program, and that we are very interested, and as we've talked about with you and Alexi, I think, about our participation in those classes so that the people taking the renters course become familiar with the human beings that are called mediators in their particular area. And I think, again, it's establishing relationships in the community. And just again, we're really appreciative of you letting us be a part of that education of the community.
Yeah, I will say that, during COVID, it has been, there's a huge impact and services have been strained. And obviously the numbers show that my program had great success, but I couldn't do it alone. And so having iMediate and additional mediators to kind of help me mediate other situations has been super beneficial and has helped people so much more than you can imagine. And so thank you.
All right. Any questions before we move on to Temple, who's going to take us a little different direction? All right, on to the next slide here.
So I want to begin with saying, actually, Chandler, you make a great segue for everything. And even only this morning, so I've known LaDawn, yes, for a little over 5 years, I believe. And with Chandler, I've only met, this is the first Zoom face-to-face. We've only been really in contact for about, maybe a month putting this all together. And a great deal of that is LaDawn is our conduit. So I learned today, and I'll get to the education piece of what we do. So Chandler, that program that you've got coming up with the education component is near and dear to my heart as far as education. The reason being, so I founded Billings Mediation Center in late 2018. The vision and the mission is to help people see conflict from a different perspective. And that first and foremost, especially in my region, we needed to educate people on what mediation really is. Again, understanding that mediation is a component of alternative dispute resolution, and very distinctive from, say, settlement conference or evaluative mediation. And so I created the center with my board, with the first mission being training people. And in order to help them then pursue the certification in Montana, because as LaDawn said, there's no licensing, but we want those of us who love mediation, are passionate about mediation and helping people. We want to be the higher level. We want to have that bar raised high on what mediation services look like, so that people are served properly. In the course of understanding the training aspect of it, we knew we had to give them a means by which the students or the trainees could then pursue the actual certification process, because the training is only one piece of it. It's the primary piece. Once they get through the training, and we've adapted significantly with that to provide, trainings that are affordable and then also available across the state for people. And then Zoom has actually become advantageous for that. So because of the way we train, we were already at the point of the pandemic to continue to serve our local justice court. So in that application of skills or of the training, we have a conflict resilience project with our Yellowstone County Justice Court. It is uniquely different from other court help projects. So CDRC and the Gallatin County they are paid for those volunteer services. But because Billings Mediation Center is coming at it from a training perspective, we are offering those services to the court and to the citizens for free, because we are giving back. First and foremost, we're easing up the burden on the courts. And third, we are opening up a whole new realm to people of what mediation can do. So with the Conflict Resilience Project in place already, when the pandemic settled in, we were able to say to the court, we can provide our services by Zoom. They're not preferred, it's not the absolute ideal, but we can still serve the court and the people by Zoom. Our justice court judges, I consider being, very savvy and very service-oriented judges, also saw the possibilities in using the mediation for the landlord-tenant perspective. So LaDawn and I together presented to them, what we can do on the landlord-tenant side. And at this point, we are conducting those services primarily where they are still self-represented litigants, landlords who, are not using attorneys, and of course, tenants who are unlikely to be able to afford an attorney, although Montana Legal Services can step in there in situations where there's necessary. Of course, in that regard, then it goes up to be a civil case in justice court. So with that, we weren't seeing, because we have so few volunteers and the pandemic, the moratorium was seemingly this moving target. As much as we met, LaDawn and I presented to the Yellowstone, Yellowstone Landlord Association back last September. We only this morning presented to the Yellowstone County Property Management Board, and it's slowly making progress. And so I'm a little envious of where Helena has come in to be able to do that. So what we have offered as a center, then you can go ahead, LaDawn, and push that forward, is to help the landlords. I think if in the housing, as far as if somebody is going to go to court, the landlord is making determinations. They're having to decide, is this where I really want to go with this? Or maybe I have to, as the pandemic, eases up. So, and of course, those people that didn't actually qualify for any protections under the pandemic, and that's an entirely different conversation. But we decided that we would extend what has been our free invitation process. So our center always allows a person, without going to court, to ask us, would you send an invite to this other person to be able to help us resolve a dispute? That process is completely free. We believe strongly in trying to allay or minimize the delays in communication. And any of us who understand communication know that delays and silence can actually be more harmful to the original conflict. So we're trying to step in and minimize those delays with an invitation process. And that was extended then to landlords and tenants with the idea of helping get to the table sooner. And where landlords wish to keep those tenants, and tenants are, they want to pay their rent, they want to remain stable. So again, trying to ease up the possibility of homelessness. So it's still in the works. Our local justice court, Yellowstone County, again, I think our judges are quite savvy and genius about helping us to have ways that can assure the landlord that they do not have to go through this eviction process again with certain language, but that even with somebody who is under, COVID, or could potentially be under the COVID, they would be allowed to have an arrangement with the landlord that would protect them from homelessness. So those, as Chandler said, the best ones are if they are coming to, maybe a month and a half in arrears. The pandemic has impacted that greatly. But again, it comes down oftentimes to what is the landlord's ability to say forego some of those arrears to be able to get back on track and help that person resume a landlord-tenant relationship without the threat of homelessness or the landlord continuing to suffer the losses. So, and again, the education piece to the heart of that is really reaching into the high schools. So one of the board members of, well, she's actually a board member of both the Yellowstone County landlords and the Yellowstone County property managers, is our desire to do similar to what Chandler's doing, but to start reaching in and essentially teaching another life skill. Mediation skills, in my mind, are a life skill. Once you learn it, it's not like you can just forget it. And it will take you through every aspect of life. It's one of the reasons I have such a passion for it. But I also believe in other life skills for young people coming into adulthood. And, we try to provide them with as many nuts and bolts, as I would call it, to what a paycheck looks like, that then leads to a budget, that then leads to, can you even afford to live on your own? What does that look like? And then ultimately into, what does a landlord-tenant relationship truly look like? And helping them to be savvy, protecting them somewhat against landlords that are less than scrupulous. And then also, trying to hopefully make it that landlords, will see the benefit of any of those tenants that have, that sort of life skill background. I know there was a brief conversation about earlier, and I think, Chandler, I was kind of hoping you would talk about it, about maybe in terms of providing this service, to give them sort of I guess a certificate that they could present to a landlord to show, look, we're serious about our obligation and our responsibility too. Could you, either give me at the top of the list, for being able to, rent from you. So I am very excited, even for, the three of us, in how we can work together to continue to grow our various programs. And so LaDawn, again, thanks for being the conduit and putting, rubber to the road in everything we've talked about. So it makes a difference. And so I guess at this point, I'd hand it back to LaDawn unless people have questions.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback Temple too. Yeah, I did forget to mention that. So one thing that, I always kind of think about when I'm working with clients too, is like when they're with the market that we're in, when they're looking for housing at this point, especially young folks too. I get a lot of transitional aged youth, depending on what happened in their case with their family life, and now they're looking for housing. Think of it as looking for a job. And so basically that housing application is going to be their resume, and coming up with cover letters, and I provide templates, and that renter course will also provide that same template. But just coming up with a cover letter to explain their strengths and what they would be doing to be a good tenant, and then including, yes, that certification. I think having that support letters, and yes, the renter course will provide certification, by having that additional support, I think just brings on that additional level of support and education for both sides. So, yeah.
Well, I know from the conversation this morning, you have three of us in Billings, that if there is, some way to implement it here, we would love to promote it here as well.
This is the fabulous thing about the Zoom video conferences, right? I mean, Hoover has all of the tools and techniques to get people together. So if there's people in Helena that want to talk to people in Billings about what we are doing, you know, relative to these 3 programs, Hoover is the perfect opportunity. So feel free to use Hoover as far as a resource. I think they said that these programs will be on the website for 6 months. So it's a good opportunity to be able to not reinvent the wheel, but to capitalize and, you know, build these programs out additionally from where they are as the kind of grassroots situation right now. The sky's the limit, as Temple has heard me say, and possibly Chandler. It's all about imagination. It's, you know, it's having the imagination and then deciding that you want to do something along those lines. So before we go to the next slide, I just want to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions, and then I'm going to go into talking about what's going on in Bozeman and Missoula.
Right, and so LaDawn, Rachel Turnbow has the following question. Does it present a conflict for mediators if you are presenting and doing outreach to landlord associations and property management associations, and they are the ones who request the mediation? Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I can, and then you're going to follow up with additional comment, aren't you?
I'm happy to help.
So one of the tasks as a mediator is to look for conflict of interests and to look for, one, an opportunity to mentor other mediators, and to make sure that we as mediators, certified mediators, remain neutral or pass the case off to somebody who doesn't have, I don't know, a vested interest. Whenever I talk to the landlord associations or property managers, I tell them, you know, I've been a landlord for most of the last now over 30 years. I have, you know, helped my daughters and my daughter's children with rental issues over the years, in addition to the mediation things that I've done. And I'm really heavily connected in the state to a lot of various and sundry communities. So one of the things that I personally have to be careful with is relationships that I have with other people, and make sure that there isn't a conflict of interest, and doing full disclosure. Now, so far, everything that I have been approached with in the court system has not been a conflict for me, no conflict of interest. And I did want to tell you about one case that I think, because we've been focusing a little bit on people that maybe don't have the money to hire an attorney, don't have the money to have complete discretion on what they have as far as a home. And I want to talk about a case where it was not about money, and they did end up homeless regardless of how much money they had. So I want to circle back around to that. But one of the beauties of the Montana Mediation Association directory, which is online, is that, and Zoom, you can use a mediator from a different community if you feel like there is going to be a conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest. For example, I worked at the Friendship Center, which is a domestic violence shelter in Helena. So it's possible that I have crossed paths with some people that might need assistance through Chandler's program, for example. So I need to be very mindful of that whenever I'm approaching a mediation. That is my personal responsibility to disclose any potential issues there. And then it's up to whoever the clients are to say, yeah, I feel good about it, or no, I don't feel good about it. It's a certified mediator has had training in determining whether they can be neutral or not. And if there's a concern with neutrality, they should not do the mediation. And there's ways to, one, avoid it, and there's ways to deal with it if you find out something in the middle of mediation. The other thing I would say is co-mediation, where a person has, there's two parties, two mediators, and so we kind of do this crisscross thing. That's the style that's most commonly viewed. So I would kind of do the questions to one party, and the co-mediator, let's just say it's Temple, would do questions to the other party, so that we have kind of a cross thing there. It's a lot easier to visualize at a table versus a video conference, but nonetheless, I think you get the idea that there's styles, techniques, methods for maintaining your neutrality as a mediator in landlord-tenant disputes. Temple, anything else?
Oh, yes. So of course I can echo everything that LaDawn said. So, and one of the things I love about the Conflict Resilience Project is we have enough, shall we say, volunteers that they have access early on to at least the name of the case to be able to go, I might have a conflict if they've had any issues. So we can try to adapt and say, is there another mediator that can take that? So we have that bit, but then we also have, again, just recognizing that if you're in the mediation room and you didn't necessarily recognize the name or something, that you can divulge or disclose, as LaDawn said, and you give the parties that option. Is that okay? And so one clarification I'd like to bring in is, what does mediation, or what does a mediator represent to somebody? So let me put it this way with respect to training. When I have had attorneys come through our training, by about the 4th session, they are realizing what they have been calling mediation is not mediation. What they have referred to as mediation is actually settlement conference. So it is an evaluative means of mediation. And in many of those situations, as attorneys, they have a much bigger concern about conflict of interest because they are evaluating. When we retain our neutrality, which is what we are very trained to do well, it's very different from that hat that attorneys have a real hard time taking off as advocates. That's what they have been well trained to be. So with what mediation does is they've actually admitted they have to really go into a different mindset and take away that advocacy hat, take away that judgment of case issues, evidence, to be able to truly mediate this dispute for these parties. And that mediation is literally facilitated so that the parties reach an agreement. It's not the mediator telling them this is the best way to go. That is not at all what we do. So in regard to that distinction, I hope that answers a bit of Rachel's question as well. Does it, Rachel? Oh, we've got 6 new messages.
There's yeah, yes, I'm looking at them, yes. Temple. So in addition, there's a question about the power imbalance, and I'm going to use that mediator term as opposed to the wording in the chat that you can all see. So it's the mediator's responsibility to maintain an equal power at the table, whether that's on Zoom or at a literal table. So for a person of modest means that maybe has low self-esteem or has felt marginalized in some capacity or another, it is the mediator's job, it is the mediator's responsibility to not side with one side or another and to try and balance the table. And one of the styles that we can use with balancing the table, the power at the table, is by adding either a co-mediator or by adding a support person. So if one party needs a support person, that is what we do. We don't prevent that. What we do prevent is an attorney coming in and speaking for the client. Our job is to level the playing field there. And so there are always going to be people that feel submissive in the process, but we as mediators do take that responsibility pretty seriously. And whenever I hear, when I'm debriefing or hear mediators debriefing, which is something that we do, maintaining confidentiality, but strategizing things that we can learn from these mediations, we almost always talk about a power imbalance and the things that we did right, wrong, do better next time. And we always talk about that. And I am very strong on the disability part of life. And so I do a fair amount of education with mediators in our state and bring that type of a conversation up often in mediator conversations about addressing, and it becomes down to a power imbalance. If a person has some sort of a disability that is making it more difficult either to live in housing or do mediation, it's the mediator's responsibility from my standpoint. A certified mediator should be able to address that and minimize the impact to the party who is feeling marginalized.
And can I just supplement one other thing, LaDawn? I think the idea that we're doing outreach to the landlords and the property managers, what we're doing is educating them on this accessibility, oftentimes so that the court, a lot of times our viewpoint is also to ease up the burden on the courts. And, ultimately, from my perspective, we're trying to ease the burden in two fronts. One, taxpayer resources. And second, for every case that we can help those parties resolve their own difference, we've opened up the slots in the court's docket for other more, things that they're not going to come to mediation. And so as to that outreach, I consider that what we're trying to do with reaching into the schools and like what Chandler's doing, that is that equal outreach to tenants or prospective tenants. And even in that regard, training them that there is this component where, communicate with your landlord and just keep those lines of communication open. So that would be that form of outreach.
I'd like to add a conversation that Chandler and I have had a couple of times, and that is how difficult it is for a program person to do mediation. I mean, we're talking about formal mediation. I'm not talking about the mediation that you do, on a day-to-day basis in your jobs that all of you are probably doing some degree. But if it's true mediation, where there would be a conflict of interest for, say, for example, Chandler trying to work with two parties, that is potentially a problem. And so that's when you get a mediator from another resource. So Montana Mediation Association mediators can step in and be that neutral party, because I think that, as Chandler and I have talked on a couple of occasions, for her to do it, she can't really be a neutral. I mean, she is an advocate for the person who needs housing assistance. That is very different from what the mediation that Temple and I, which is formal. And I think, to capitalize on what Temple said earlier about people's perception of what mediation is, a lot of people believe that we, certified mediators, are going to come in and make a decision for the two parties. And we do not do that. It is, and that's part of the conflict of interest issue. We do not make the decision for the parties. The parties come to that decision of their own, which makes it stronger, because if we do a written agreement, which is going to always be my priority, and I think most certified mediators, their priority would be a written agreement. That written agreement that I promised, or two parties promised to, I shouldn't use my name because I'm out of it, but the two parties agreed to do certain things. They are bound by that written statement, and that statement can be supported, upheld in the cases that go to court because people didn't follow through on their commitments. So it's not just it worked and now we're done. with a mediation that has a signed written agreement, if either of the parties fail to follow through on that commitment, that is strong evidence to the court when it does go to court of who is able to comply and who is not willing to comply. And I don't mean that in, one party is and one party isn't. There's usually variations of that. So I would like to talk about an example. And this one, as I said, is quite different because this is a person who received an eviction notice and had the resources to pay the rent. It wasn't in arrears. It was a month-to-month rental agreement. And for
LaDawn, I apologize. Can I, because Naomi has asked this question twice and I think she may
sorry.
be deciding she's going to lose it, but it goes exactly with what you were talking about, the Montana Mediation Association. If you can answer hers, is mediation available across the state of Montana or only in specific areas?
So there are court sponsored, I'll use that term, in Billings, in Missoula, and in Bozeman. Those are the only 3 centers. So if they are in those communities, those counties, then there are options for court mediation. Outside of those counties in Montana, there's only, contacting someone from the Montana Mediation Association or looking in the telephone book, which we all know we don't look in the telephone book anymore. Googling it will get you the Montana Mediation Association. So that's how you would use the person that's in Havre. I personally know that there's a person in Havre that has done mediation in the past. I don't remember if he's actually a member at this point in time, but that would be the thing to do, is to find out who's a mediator in your community and build a relationship with them. There's a person in Lewistown that serves Havre. There's also a person in Great Falls that serves Havre. We started, I'm gonna say 5 years ago. I don't think I knew Temple at the time we did this, but we started working in Eastern Montana with a grant with the Montana Mediation Association in Sydney, with a judge that was up there at the time, and we're focused on trying to get mediators to help people in Eastern Montana during the oil boom. That was particularly the strategy. And that's why Montana Mediation and the mediators in Montana were all poised to use Zoom, because it was already being used to cover Eastern Montana. Billings concept in Temple's concept in Billings was to bring mediators to the eastern side of the state where we had almost no mediators. Right. So yes, there are mediators available all over the state, and by Zoom, you can use anybody as a mediator.
And so Teresa has a question. I don't know if LaDawn, you want to finish telling your story first, but to maybe represent the answer to this question, could mediation help with a client who has applied for an apartment and gets denied because of a felony from 15 years ago?
So in my answer in the chat box before this ever started, I don't remember the name of the person that put it in there, but I used the term barriers instead of saying convictions or whatever. So a lot of people have barriers. I mean, you all know that. You probably have a bigger, longer list than I do of what barriers are, but I've got a pretty long list of barriers. And one of them is a barrier if a person has a felony or some conviction. But just as problematic is whoever's living in the house, whether that's a mom, dad, relative, spouse, whoever, that has something on their record that is a barrier to housing. So yes, from my perspective, I can't speak for all mediators, and it certainly would not, I think, be possible to do it through the court system. But certainly I believe in working with landlords that would, maybe a property manager that would be willing to engage in mediation with a person who needs housing, who has a barrier or 2 or 3 or 5 to housing, working with them, having them sit down together and saying, I used heroin 10 years ago. I've been clean for 2 years. I really need somebody to listen to me and to give me a chance. And I know those conversations go on all the time with landlords. I'm offering an opportunity for people to use mediation as a formalized, structured, facilitated way to have those conversations to attempt to overcome some of those barriers. So this case that I was talking about, it went through the court, and the couple had been given a 30-day eviction notice, and it had nothing to do with failure to pay rent at all. So if it's not something about rent and it's not something about damage to the house, then my conclusion is it's a communication barrier. So what ended up happening is this case went to court, and the decision has not been made by the judge yet because they did not settle in mediation, which is fine. I mean, there's a percent that settle and there's a percent that do not. And that's okay, because the process is what's important and people communicating with each other. But in this particular case, the outcome of the 30-day notice in the middle of COVID last summer was that this very well-off couple ended up living in a tent in a KOA campground, I think it was a KOA. Anyway, so for me, that's kind of startling, because I'm used to hearing people that don't have money living in the campground in their tent. But because the housing market is what it is, and because of COVID was going on, this couple could not find anywhere to live, and money really was of no object. So I feel like that if the conversations could have occurred prior to the eviction notice going out, then we would have had a better ability to settle. Because by the time it got to mediation, it was just, you know, a toe-to-toe, inflexible situation. And so that is why it's been left to the judge to decide what to do about this matter. That is part of what Chandler and Temple and I have talked about numerous occasions, is prevention. And that's what I said to the landlord or property manager association meeting this morning. I said, if somebody is thinking about giving a 3-day or 30-day eviction notice for whatever reason, really, I would hope that people would consider mediation, because we can work magic sometimes with eliminating or decreasing the barrier that's causing the landlord to want to provide that 3-day or 30-day eviction notice. If we can work with them as mediators, and I don't mean we as in Temple and I, if mediators can work with the landlords when they're wanting to do the 3-day or 30-day notice, then we have a better chance at settling, and the landlord and the tenant have a better chance of maintaining, one, the health of the house, because as you all know, that sometimes people get mad and they go on a self-destruct path, which causes it to be even harder to get a reference from a landlord if they have destroyed the previous house. So it gives an opportunity to solve the problem, or at least minimize the problem before it turns into a, you know, a remodel the entire house because someone's gotten mad, or they didn't pay me, I'm not giving them a positive reference check. When it was over, I'm making this up, $1 that's in arrears. So any more questions before we move on to the next slide?
I would just add one other thing, LaDawn, to all of that, and that is, as much as a landlord may attempt to sort of reach out to the tenant, I think the tenant perceives on a regular basis, depending upon how tenuous their situation is, that they are in a severe imbalance of power. And so I think, the mediator, one of those pieces of magic is that we can come in and literally open up those means of communication, because we know how to balance the table despite the, what status of relationship they have. So I think that's one of the privileges, I would say, as a mediator and being a neutral, is to be able to facilitate that process.
And honestly, the mediator has no skin in the game as far as the solution goes. Our loyalty is to the process, not necessarily the people. So that's our goal, is to honor the process, which is different. If I am vested in making the right decision, that's different. Then I have a hard time staying neutral. I'm not vested in the decision, I'm vested in the process. And we do, as mediators, remind each other about that periodically. Yes, pretty regularly. So next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the Montana Mediation Association. For those of you who can see the screen, it is mtmediation.org. That is our website. That is our directory. That is how you find out how to become a mediator. That's how you find out about the ethics of mediation, because we do have a code of ethics that we follow. And one of those code of ethics is what we talked about already today, as being, disclosing potential conflicts of interest, trying to balance the table as best as possible, and being honest and, upright people in the mediation work that we do. And Temple, I don't know if this is possible to do. I didn't ask you, but is it possible to put up our Montana Mediation directory if I give you co-host? I usually am able to give co-host. Let's see if I can give co-host.
At the moment, it doesn't seem to be telling me I'm restricted at all. So let me go find it for you before I try to do any sharing.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. All right, so we'll just keep posted, posted on that as far as Temple. It would be really nice to be able to show you that. But
Yeah,
as I said, there's.
Sorry, this is Naomi. I set it so that she should be able to share. Anyone should be able to share if they need to. So let me know if you have any problems, but it should be set up okay.
Wonderful. We have all kinds of things, including training, on our Montana Mediation Association website. And anyone can participate in those trainings for any reason. Some of them are free, some of them are for a fee. There are some trainings that are at, what's the term, when you can just watch them anytime you want to. They're not scheduled. They're
at your leisure.
Whatever. Yes, so well, that's, yes, preferably at your leisure, as opposed to, being forced into it. But there are a variety of trainings, as I mentioned, for various costs and different subjects. I mean, we're talking about landlord tenant issues today, but honestly, there's a whole bunch of things, a bunch of subject matter that can be addressed with mediation. So that's also something to keep in mind. And I just want to talk a little bit about Missoula and Bozeman. How are you doing, Temple?
It's up on my screen. I was hoping you were seeing it too.
No, not yet.
It's saying share. I've got the Montana Mediation Association.
Let me try stop sharing.
Oh,
let me try stop sharing.
It should be, actually, it looked like it was buffering. Any success now? No?
I'm seeing the Montana Mediation Association screen. Is anybody else?
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So I am at the home page. And so the way that you find a mediator is to click that link. Of course, there's all sorts of other buttons. We'd love you to learn more about mediation. And so you can filter it anyone with 10 miles of, and we've got basically every city from which you're going to find a certified mediator. And then when you choose one, so for example, let me get LaDawn here. I can also do a search on the screen. And there you are, LaDawn. I'm going to open you up. So what you can see there is her profile, and we have some little indicators. This means that she is a certified mediator, because we do have associate members who are just people that love what we do and support the association, but are also possibly in the process of training. LaDawn is also skilled in providing mediation by Zoom, so that's that little icon. And she also has the additional designation, as many of you know her from her private or her former life, and working with elder care. So a lot of those, and then you can learn more about that mediator. And a lot of times they will then have, their practice areas. I hope I'm not scrolling too fast. And other services. So again, see, there's one. This answers the question of, I think, Dana, as far as willing to travel. Not everyone is, but there's a great number of us who are. And we take each case, each situation, based on what the people need, where it is, what it would take to do that. But again, as for Eastern Montana, we sure did do our level best to open the doors with technology and the grant from the Montana Justice Foundation that was for Zoom. And it was 2015, you and Kay Ree, LaDawn, were up in Sydney, and I was in Billings. We were kind of ironing out some Zoom questions and things of that nature. So
it was kind of a trial run.
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Quite successful, actually.
It was. We had people all over the state. We didn't even know we could do it. And we managed it and found out we could.
Yeah. So did you have anything else you wanted me to show as far as our website at this point?
No, that is perfect, Temple. Does anyone have any questions? So back to the Montana Mediation Association PowerPoint slide. Whoever's phone is ringing, if you could put yourself on mute, I'd really appreciate it. I wanted to let you know, for those of you that live in the Bozeman area and the Missoula area, I'll start with Missoula. That is the CDRC, Conflict Dispute Resolution Center. And they have an executive director there who is kind of like Temple, what she was describing as an executive director. So they manage the cases with the court in Missoula, and they do a lot of things outside of landlord tenant, just like the Billings Mediation Center does. And they have been in existence as long as I've been involved with mediation. So I'm going to say they've been in existence for at least 15 years. And they're very stable and have a great program. 25 years, Temple
Over
is
25 years.
Just pretty impressive. And they do really good work. And they have a separate training program that they put all of their mediators through. And they collaborate with us as far as the Montana Mediation Association very well. And they, Gallatin County and Yellowstone County, have all expressed to me separately the increase in landlord tenant cases that have been going through the court system has, I don't know what it was, astronomical or more than doubled and that sort of thing. And they are all three of the centers are doing mediation through Zoom through the court. And so that situation is a little more complicated because you're using the court clerks to get the information from the mediation agreements to the judge, essentially. but mediation done outside of those court systems are really unique to the mediator that you hire or is working with you. So in the case of Chandler and I, we created an intake form, and we have a template, which outlines the kind of boilerplate information about a mediation agreement, which is a lot more complicated than Temple's stipulated agreements because the court has certain language they need, which is different from a traditional mediator who's working private practice. You're probably interested in knowing that the price is variable based on the mediator. So my price for mediation per hour is different than K-Ray's, which is different than Temple's, which is different than, who else have we mentioned? Bonnie Fedchalk in Bozeman. All of those prices are unique to the program or the mediator. Bozeman, Gallatin County, has had a mediation center for probably the same amount of time as Missoula, but the program has changed names and executive directors has changed quite a lot over the years. They currently are working through the court, and they are ready to help anytime people need mediation, but they don't have a link in the community that I'm aware of, like what we've been talking about with Chandler. And the remaining communities, the smaller communities in Montana, we don't have a formalized process or program. It's up to the individual mediator in that individual community and what networks they've created in their community. So we want to make sure that people have enough time for questions. I just want to say that we're on Facebook. Montana Mediation Association is on Facebook. We have a Gmail, so if somebody needs help in another community, we have the ability to talk to each other and find a mediator for that location. We are a relatively small community of mediators in Montana, and I'm talking about certified or associate members. And so we do talk to each other, not necessarily about cases, but use each other as a resource for our businesses and for debriefing and for co-mediation, et cetera. We do use each other in those capacities across the state. It is 2:19, so we have a few minutes to answer more questions. My chat number says 11, which is a lot. So Temple, can you look at those and see what we've got for questions, please? And Chandler, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I don't think I do. But yeah, just to say thank you. I think it goes to kind of show when I was mentioning, so yeah, I definitely do a little bit more informal, and having that resource with both you guys with iMediate and other mediators just goes a long way with just the housing market and where we're at. And so I appreciate everything that you guys do and helping with processes for folks that are just needing assistance in both realms, and just being that that middle person to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Chandler. Couldn't do it without you.
I'm looking forward to working more closely with Chandler if we can, however we can.
Absolutely.
And so I'm looking, it looks like we've got everyone. Love the people that put their names in the chat box and where they're from, what they're doing. And I did see one question for the URL. I assumed that you meant the URL for montanamediation.org. So I put that in the chat to everyone. And basically, Chandler, you had your slide in the beginning that has your information. Did you want to put yours in the chat just to cover all bases?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Other than Chandler, which I fully expect to see Chandler on the directory soon. And the directory, the mtmediation .org directory is definitely going to get you to basically anywhere you need to be for mediation in Montana.
Yep. Naomi, what do we do next? Naomi, can you hear me?
Yes.
What do we
Sorry,
do next?
My earphone hit it. Well, this is supposed to be our question and answer and discussion, but we've kind of done that throughout the session. So if there aren't any other questions, I guess we can probably wrap up a little early. But we thank everybody for participating. Remember, if questions do come up, there are community conversations through the Whova app. And everybody's contact information should be listed there as well. If something comes up later and you think, oh, wait, I did have a question. So with that, we just really thank the presenters for all this really good information and for all the work that you're doing across the state. It's really a fantastic resource, and I'm happy to have learned more about it.
Yeah.
So
I think all of us have learned something too.
Yeah,
from
this
each
has been
other.
Great. Yeah, so follow up on Whova if you have any other questions, but this does conclude our day together. We look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow morning. The coffee talk is optional, but it would be great to kind of chit chat with everyone. And then the plenary session starts at 9 a.m. So if anybody doesn't have any other questions or comments, then we can just end a little early.
And thank you to Naomi and Whova to make this opportunity possible.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. That was a great presentation.
I'm glad you liked it. Good.
All right. Well, we'll see you all.
Bye.
Hopefully in the coffee. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.